What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses goes head-to-head with late-night television's sharpest tongue? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had security rushing to the stage and left Jimmy Kimmel's audience in complete shock. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the moment when diplomatic restraint meets comedic provocation and the gloves come off entirely. If you want to see how this unfolds, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because this story gets wilder with every exchange. The studio lights were blazing hot as Jimmy Kimmel welcomed his guest with his trademark grin. But something was already different in the air. Angelina Jolie walked onto the stage with purpose, her expression serious, almost steely. The audience applauded, but even they seemed to sense the tension crackling between host and guest. "Angelina Jolie, everybody," Jimmy announced, gesturing toward his guest chair. "Thanks for being here tonight despite everything that's been going on." Angelina raised an eyebrow as she settled into her chair. "Despite everything. That's an interesting way to start an interview, Jimmy." "Well, you know what I mean," Jimmy said, leaning back in his chair with that casual confidence that had made him famous. "The headlines, the controversy, the whole humanitarian thing that people have been talking about." "The humanitarian thing?" Angelina's voice carried a sharp edge that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably. "Are you referring to my work with refugees, or are you making some kind of joke that I'm not getting?" Jimmy chuckled, but it came out forced. "Come on, Angelina, you know I have to ask about it. People are saying that some of your recent statements about international aid have been, let's say, controversial." "Controversial to whom exactly?" Angelina leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "To people who think providing clean water to children is political. To those who believe that speaking truth about global inequality is somehow inappropriate." The audience was dead silent now. This wasn't the lighthearted banter they'd expected from a typical late-night interview. Jimmy tried to steer back to safer ground, but Angelina wasn't having it. "Look, I'm just saying what people are talking about," Jimmy said, his smile becoming more strained. "Some folks think that celebrities should stick to entertaining and leave the politics to politicians. And some folks think that comedians should stick to making jokes instead of pretending to be journalists." Angelina shot back without missing a beat. "But here we are." The studio audience let out a collective gasp. Jimmy's smile faltered for the first time, and you could practically see him recalibrating his approach. This was not going according to his usual script. "Wow, okay," Jimmy said, trying to laugh it off. "I can see you're passionate about this." "Passionate?" Angelina's laugh was cold. "Jimmy, I've spent the last 15 years in refugee camps, in war zones, in places where children die because they don't have access to basic medical care. You think passion is the right word for what I feel when someone tries to minimize that work as a celebrity publicity stunt." "I never said it was a publicity stunt," Jimmy protested. But his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You didn't have to say it directly," Angelina replied. "But that's what you meant, isn't it? That's what this whole line of questioning is about. You want me to defend my commitment to humanitarian work as if it's some kind of hobby I picked up to look good in magazines." Jimmy was clearly struggling now. His writers hadn't prepared him for this level of pushback. "Look, Angelina, I think there might be a misunderstanding here." "Oh, there's definitely a misunderstanding," Angelina said, her voice growing colder by the second. "You seem to think that because I'm in your chair, I'm going to play along with whatever narrative you've cooked up for tonight's show. But I'm not here to be your punchline, Jimmy." The tension in the studio was becoming unbearable. Audience members were looking around at each other, unsure whether they should be laughing or preparing for something unprecedented in late-night television history. "I'm not trying to make you a punchline," Jimmy said. But even as the words left his mouth, both he and Angelina knew they rang hollow. "Really?" Angelina's eyebrows shot up. "Then explain to me why your first 3 questions have all been designed to make my humanitarian work sound frivolous or controversial. Explain to me why you're more interested in gossip and manufactured drama than in having an actual conversation about issues that matter." Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Angelina wasn't finished. "You know what the real controversy is, Jimmy. The real controversy is that we live in a world where someone can't speak up for the most vulnerable people on Earth without being accused of having ulterior motives. The real controversy is that entertainment has become so shallow that genuine concern for human suffering is treated like a character flaw. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. Jimmy looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk, but Angelina was just getting started. "So, let me ask you something," she continued, leaning back in her chair with the confidence of someone who had just taken complete control of the conversation. "Are you going to ask me anything of substance tonight? Or are we going to continue this charade where you pretend to be interested in real issues while actually just looking for sound bites?" Jimmy swallowed hard, realizing that this interview had already gone completely off the rails, and they were only 10 minutes in. Jimmy cleared his throat and tried to regain some semblance of control, but the damage was already done. His usual charm had evaporated, replaced by the desperate energy of someone who knew they were losing badly. "You're right," he said, attempting to sound sincere. "Let me ask you about your latest film project, then I understand you're directing another movie that deals with international conflict." Angelina's expression didn't soften. "Is that your idea of substance, Jimmy? Asking about my movie? Because if you think that's what matters most to me right now, you're proving my point about how disconnected this industry has become." "I'm trying to give you a platform to talk about your work," Jimmy said, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "My work?" Angelina laughed. But there was no humor in it. "My work is in the field, Jimmy. My work is sitting with mothers who have lost everything. Listening to children who have seen things no child should ever see. My work is fighting for policy changes that could save millions of lives. Making movies is my job, but it's not my work." The audience was completely captivated now, witnessing something they'd never seen before on late-night television. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a masterclass in moral conviction facing off against commercial superficiality. "Okay, I get it," Jimmy said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You want to talk about serious things, but this is a comedy show." "Angelina, people tune in to laugh, to forget about their problems for a while." "And there it is," Angelina said, pointing at him. "The real problem. You think human suffering is a problem people should forget about. You think laughter is more important than action." "That's not what I said," Jimmy protested. "It's exactly what you said," Angelina shot back. "You just told me that people's desire to laugh is more important than their need to know what's happening in the world. You just prioritized entertainment over education, comfort over conscience." Jimmy was visibly sweating now under the studio lights. His usual confidence had completely abandoned him. "Look, I'm not trying to be the enemy here." "Then stop acting like one," Angelina replied without hesitation. "Stop treating serious issues like they're inconvenient interruptions to your comedy routine. Stop pretending that talking about refugees and humanitarian crises is somehow inappropriate for your show when you have no problem making jokes about politicians and current events." "That's different," Jimmy said weakly. "How is it different?" Angelina demanded. "Because politics affects Americans and humanitarian crises affect people. You don't know. Because domestic issues matter and international suffering doesn't. Explain to me how it's different, Jimmy." Jimmy opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched uncomfortably as he realized he had no good answer. "You can't explain it," Angelina continued. "Because there is no explanation. The only difference is that making jokes about politicians gets you applause. And talking about dying children makes people uncomfortable, so you've chosen applause over awareness, comfort over compassion." The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This had become something unprecedented, a complete dismantling of the entertainment industry's priorities in real time. "You know what's really tragic, Jimmy?" Angelina said, her voice taking on a tone of genuine sadness. "You have one of the biggest platforms in media. Millions of people watch this show every night. You could use that influence to actually make a difference, to shine a light on issues that matter, to inspire people to care about something bigger than themselves." "I do care," Jimmy said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Do you?" Angelina challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you care more about ratings than responsibility. You care more about maintaining your comfortable little bubble than acknowledging the reality of what's happening in the world." Jimmy tried to interrupt, but Angelina held up her hand. "I'm not finished," she said firmly. "You invited me here tonight, and I'm going to say what I came here to say. You want to know what's controversial? What's controversial is that we live in a world where someone can make millions of dollars telling jokes while children die of preventable diseases. And somehow the person trying to help those children is seen as the problem. The camera caught Jimmy's face as he realized this interview was spiraling completely beyond his control. His writers were probably screaming in his earpiece, but there was no way to salvage this. Now, what's controversial, Angelina continued, is that we have normalized indifference. We have made caring about other people's suffering seem like an extreme position. We have turned compassion into a character flaw and apathy into a virtue. That's not fair, Jimmy said. But his voice was barely above a whisper. Fair. Angelina's voice cracked with emotion. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that a child in Yemen dies every 10 minutes from preventable causes while we argue about whether it's appropriate to mention it on a comedy show? Is it fair that refugees flee violence only to be treated like political pawns? Is it fair that humanitarian workers risk their lives to help people while celebrities get criticized for talking about it? The studio was so quiet that the sound of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Jimmy looked like he wanted to disappear, but Angelina wasn't done with him yet. You know what I think, Jimmy, she said, leaning forward with an intensity that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. I think you're scared. I think you're scared of having a real conversation because it might make your audience think about something other than themselves. You're scared of challenging people because it might make them uncomfortable. That's not true, Jimmy managed to say, isn't it? Angelina asked. Then prove it right here, right now. Ask me a real question about something that matters. Show your audience that you're capable of more than surface-level entertainment. Jimmy stared at Angelina for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her challenge hanging in the air like a loaded weapon. The audience could sense that this was the moment everything would either be salvaged or completely destroyed. You want a real question? Jimmy said, his voice suddenly taking on an edge that surprised everyone. Fine, here's a real question. Who made you the moral authority on what matters and what doesn't? Who gave you the right to come on my show and lecture everyone about how they should think and feel? The shift in energy was immediate and electric. Angelina's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and for the first time all night, she looked genuinely taken aback. Excuse me, she said quietly, but there was a storm brewing in her voice. You heard me, Jimmy said, his confidence suddenly returning as he found his footing in familiar territory. Attack mode. You waltz in here with your sanctimonious attitude, talking down to everyone like we're all morally inferior because we don't spend our lives in refugee camps. Maybe some of us have different ways of making a difference. Different ways. Angelina's voice was deadly calm. Now, what ways would those be, Jimmy? Making people laugh while the world burns. Helping them forget about problems instead of solving them. Maybe helping people cope with a difficult world is more valuable than you think. Jimmy shot back. Maybe giving people a moment of joy, a reason to smile, maybe that matters, too. Not everyone can be a saint, Angelina. The audience was on the edge of their seats. Now, this had become a philosophical battle between two completely different worldviews, and neither participant was backing down. A saint, Angelina laughed, but it was sharp and bitter. Jimmy, I'm not trying to be a saint. I'm trying to be a human being. I'm trying to use the platform I've been given to help people who can't help themselves. But apparently that makes me sanctimonious. It makes you self-righteous, Jimmy said, his voice gaining strength. It makes you someone who thinks they're better than everyone else because they've decided their cause is more important than anyone else's contribution to society. My cause. Angelina stood up from her chair and the entire studio tensed. My cause is human survival, Jimmy. My cause is children not dying from diseases that cost 50 cents to cure. If that makes me self-righteous, then I'll wear that label proudly. And there it is, Jimmy said, also standing now. The martyrdom complex. The idea that you're suffering for the greater good while the rest of us are just shallow entertainers who don't understand the real world. You don't understand the real world, Angelina said, her voice rising for the first time all night. You live in a bubble of privilege and comfort, making jokes about things you've never experienced, talking about issues you've never had to face. You mock what you don't understand and dismiss what makes you uncomfortable. At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not, Jimmy fired back. At least I don't use tragedy to make myself look noble and enlightened. The words hit like a physical blow. Angelina went completely still, and for a moment the entire studio held its breath. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but it carried more menace than any shout. What did you just say to me? Jimmy realized he had crossed a line, but he was too far in to back down now. You heard what I said. You think I use tragedy for personal gain. Angelina's voice was barely above a whisper, but every word was crystal clear. You think I exploit the suffering of others to make myself look good. I think you use your humanitarian work as a shield against criticism and a weapon against anyone who doesn't measure up to your standards, Jimmy said, his voice shaking slightly as he realized the magnitude of what he had just accused her of. Angelina took a step toward him, and security guards who had been stationed around the studio began moving closer to the stage. Let me tell you something, Jimmy, she said, her voice filled with a fury that was barely contained. I have held dying children in my arms. I have looked into the eyes of mothers who have lost everything. I have seen things that will haunt me for the rest of my life. And you think I do that for publicity? I think you do it because it makes you feel superior to people like me, Jimmy said, his voice cracking under the pressure. People like you. Angelina's laugh was hollow and terrifying. People who think human suffering is a joke. People who prioritize entertainment over empathy. People who use their platform to mock instead of motivate. You're right, Jimmy. I do feel superior to people like that. The studio erupted in gasps and murmurs. This had gone beyond a heated interview into something approaching a public execution. You know what the real tragedy is here, Angelina continued, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had completely taken control. It's not that you disagree with me. It's that you're proving every point I've made tonight. You're showing everyone exactly what I'm talking about when I say this industry has lost its soul. Jimmy was visibly shaking now, realizing that this interview would define his career in the worst possible way. I think we should take a commercial break, he said weakly. No, Angelina said firmly. We're not taking a break. You wanted a real conversation, Jimmy. You wanted to challenge me. Well, here's your chance. Defend your position. Explain to your audience why making people laugh is more important than saving their lives. That's not what I said, Jimmy protested. It's exactly what you said, Angelina replied. It's what you've been saying all night. It's what this entire industry says every single day through its actions and priorities. The security guards were now positioned at the edge of the stage, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. The director was probably having a heart attack in the control room, but the cameras kept rolling. You want to know what's really controversial, Jimmy? Angelina said, taking another step closer to him. What's controversial is that someone in your position, with your influence, with your platform, chooses to use it for nothing but shallow entertainment while the world desperately needs leadership and awareness. I'm not a leader, Jimmy said. Desperately. I'm a comedian. Exactly, Angelina said, her voice filled with disappointment. You're a comedian who had the chance to be something more and chose to stay small instead. You had the opportunity to use your voice for good and decided that getting laughs was more important than changing lives. She turned to walk away, but then stopped and looked back at him one final time. This interview is over, Jimmy. Not because you ended it, but because I refused to waste another second trying to have a meaningful conversation with someone who has chosen mediocrity over meaning. As she walked toward the exit, the studio exploded into chaos. With audience members shouting and security moving in, Jimmy stood frozen on his stage, realizing that he had just experienced the most devastating professional moment of his career. And that's how one of Hollywood's most respected actresses completely dismantled one of late-night television's biggest stars, leaving him speechless and his audience stunned. If you want to see more explosive celebrity confrontations like this one, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what do you think was the most brutal moment of this entire exchange.